Welcome the anointed ones. The heaviest crown is not made of gold, it's forged in the fires of resilience. Chosen ones, before you even grasped the concept of a trial, you were enrolled in the divine curriculum. No textbook, no syllabus, just life unleashing its full spectrum of storms, betrayals, losses, and those agonizing nights where the silence of the Almighty resonated louder than any thunderclap. And here's the raw, unfiltered truth that many shy away from acknowledging: the most grueling examination is the one where the instructor remains utterly silent until the very end. Scientists posit that the average human can withstand approximately 45 units of pain before succumbing, yet you have weathered betrayals that could have toppled empires. You navigated infernos with your sanity clinging precariously, yet you steadfastly refused to surrender your soul. This isn't mere endurance, it's celestial calibration. And that's precisely why the time has come to illuminate the grand design you have triumphed. And let's be candid, there were moments when it felt less like a spiritual crucible and more like being the hapless protagonist in a cosmic jest. If life were a comedic performance, you were the central figure, constantly stumbling over unseen obstacles while the audience collectively gasped. But now the pivotal revelation: each stumble was in reality a calculated step closer to your unveiling. What appeared to be humiliation was in truth profound preparation. So listen intently, because what you perceived as random suffering was in actuality a divinely ordained syllabus. And now, having passed through the crucible, it is time to lift the veil and reveal the intricate tapestry of God's secret workings. This isn't about eliciting sympathy, it's about unleashing inherent power. This isn't solely about endurance, it's about the extraordinary emergence. Chosen ones, you have navigated a trial that remains unseen by most, and today you will finally comprehend its purpose. Number 1, you were tested beyond human measurement. You were tested beyond the conventional thresholds of human endurance, and that is the aspect of your narrative that will remain elusive to many. It wasn't simply a matter of how much duress you could tolerate before reaching your breaking point. It was about assessing your capacity to remain incorruptible when life relentlessly dismantled every semblance of security you thought you possessed. Anyone can brace themselves and persevere through a finite period of adversity, but what distinguishes you is that your trial was meticulously designed to assess something far more profound than mere fortitude. It was intended to reveal whether your character, your faith, and your very soul could remain unblemished when every other facet of your being was stretched beyond the limits of rationality. Reflect on it: the trials didn't merely assail your physical body or your financial stability. They attacked your identity, your dignity, your sense of belonging, and even your fundamental belief in the inherent goodness of the divine. This transcends mere endurance for its own sake. It represents refinement at a level that few individuals ever encounter. God wasn't simply inquiring, can they survive? He was profoundly asking, can they survive without sacrificing their very essence? That is the defining characteristic of the chosen, because mere survival can breed bitterness, resentment, or emotional detachment. However, you persevered without compromising your values, without succumbing to pressure, and without allowing the inferno to transform you into the very thing that was assaulting you. The trial was inherently unjust, and it was intended to be so. It was a divine calibration, a precise weighing and measuring process that distinguishes those who merely exist from those who carry an eternal purpose. Others falter and assign blame, but you adapted and evolved. That is the essence of triumph, not emerging unscathed, but emerging uncorrupted, even when profound exhaustion left you questioning your own inherent worth. You never traded your soul for expediency, even when betrayal tempted you to become someone you are not. You clung to the integrity that everyone else dismissed. What's remarkable is that the passing wasn't apparent at the time. You didn't cross a designated finish line or receive thunderous applause. Instead, you awoke day after day, shouldering burdens you didn't know how to bear, and steadfastly refused to allow the encroaching darkness to redefine your identity. That is what captured the attention of the heavens. The truth is, you weren't being compared to anyone else. You were being measured against the unique destiny that only you could fulfill. And you triumphed not because you were flawless, but because you remained steadfast when every fiber of your being was tempted to abandon hope. That is the true essence of being chosen. Number 2, your innocence was the true battlefield. Your innocence served as the true battleground. And this is the dimension most will overlook if they merely scrutinize your life superficially. The assaults weren't merely directed at your possessions, your affiliations, or even your potential for advancement. They were aimed at the purity of your heart, the gentleness of your spirit, and the inherent light that distinguished you from others. The truth is, destroying your material wealth or tarnishing your reputation would have never been sufficient. The underlying objective was to taint you, to transform you into someone unrecognizable by poisoning your character with the insidious venom of bitterness, resentment, or vengeance. If they could successfully corrupt your essence, then they wouldn't merely prevail against you. They would erase the very qualities that designated you as chosen. That is why the trial was never truly about the losses you endured. It was about your response to those losses. Recovering lost finances or missed opportunities is possible, but once innocence is lost, once the soul becomes hardened and distorted, such damage is notoriously difficult to reverse. The enemy understood that if you cease to love, cease to forgive, cease to believe in inherent goodness, then you would carry that wound indefinitely, even if you projected an image of strength externally. And that's why every betrayal, every instance of rejection, every experience of unfair treatment was in essence an attempt to contaminate your innate purity. But you prevailed because you resolutely refused to allow your pain to reshape you into the image of those who inflicted it. You didn't allow your heart to calcify into stone even when succumbing to apathy seemed far easier. You didn't allow cynicism to dominate your perspective even when you possessed every justification to isolate yourself. You didn't allow bitterness to take root even when it seemed entirely warranted. Such restraint doesn't equate to weakness, it represents divine strength. It requires far greater power to maintain tenderness in a callous world than to allow the world's cruelty to harden you. The mere fact that your innocence remains vibrant serves as undeniable proof that you won the unseen war. You traversed the depths of hell, yet you emerged without the lingering scent of smoke. That is what renders you exceptional. Many endure trials and survive, but they emerge twisted, hardened, and fundamentally unrecognizable. You survived intact, and that is a victory that no one can ever strip away from you. That is why heaven proclaims you as chosen. Number 3, the silence of God was never abandonment. The silence of God was never synonymous with abandonment, though in the immediacy of those moments it felt like the most profound desolation imaginable. Those prolonged periods when your prayers seemed to ascend no further than the ceiling, when your desperate cries went unanswered, constituted some of the most arduous trials of your existence. But that silence was not indicative of neglect. It represented a distinct form of instruction, one that deliberately stripped away your dependence on external signs, explicit confirmations, and incessant reassurance. The silence was God's method of compelling you to mature into someone capable of recognizing Him without perpetually requiring Him to articulate His presence. Reflect on it. In the nascent stages of your spiritual journey with God, you required Him to respond promptly, to furnish you with readily discernible signs, to explicitly validate every step you took. That was the rudimentary language of a novice. But chosen ones undergo a different kind of training. You weren't intended to subsist on meager morsels of proof. You were intended to embody proof yourself. God's silence was not indicative of Him abandoning you. It was Him facilitating your elevation. He was training you to discern the whispers emanating from beneath the surface of the silence, to perceive His presence without the crutch of comforting words, and to trust in His guiding hand even when you couldn't visually detect His fingerprints. And let's be unflinchingly honest, it inflicted pain. The silence compelled you to question everything. Had I been forgotten? Had I somehow failed? Was I ever truly chosen at all? These questions were an integral component of the examination. They burrowed deep into the bedrock of your faith, pressing to ascertain whether your belief was contingent on favorable outcomes or whether it was fundamentally rooted in God Himself. Anyone can maintain trust while being effortlessly carried, but it requires a chosen one to sustain trust even when they feel abandoned and adrift. That's why the silence was never intended as a form of punishment. It was designed to cultivate within you a resilient faith that remains unshaken even when all external sources of reassurance cease. What renders this even more remarkable is that the silence didn't merely test you, it fundamentally transformed you. Somewhere within those protracted periods of quietude, your inherent confidence underwent a profound shift. You transitioned from imploring for constant reassurance to walking with unwavering authority, not because you felt inherently strong, but because you finally internalized the realization that God remained steadfastly with you, irrespective of whether He voiced His presence audibly. That profound realization constitutes irrefutable proof that you have triumphed. His silence wasn't absence, it was strategic maneuvering. And now you possess the fortitude to stand firm in situations where others crumble, because you have learned to navigate forward without requiring perpetual validation. That is the intrinsic power of being chosen. Number 4, you weren't just attacked, you were studied. You weren't simply subjected to random attacks, you were meticulously studied. That's the aspect that eludes most individuals when they observe the peculiar, unrelenting patterns that define your battles. Nothing about what you endured was accidental or random. The opposition wasn't the result of mere chaos. It was a carefully calculated strategy. Forces beyond the scope of your immediate perception observed your life with an almost surgical precision, dissecting your vulnerabilities, your triggers, your habitual behaviors, even scrutinizing those closest to you. Every instance of betrayal, every sudden cataclysm, every cyclical pattern that seemed too perfectly timed to be mere coincidence, all of it was meticulously orchestrated. The intention wasn't solely to inflict pain. It was to scrutinize you, to identify the precise fissure where they could initiate a catastrophic breach from within. They diligently observed what provoked your anger, what induced despair, what fueled your moments of doubt. They took note of the individuals you trusted and attempted to weaponize them against you. They methodically studied your patterns, your fleeting moments of vulnerability, your seasons of profound exhaustion, and strategically launched their attacks when you were at your weakest. That's why certain events impacted you with such pinpoint accuracy. It felt almost supernatural because in essence it was. This wasn't random misfortune, it was a targeted campaign of spiritual warfare. But here's what they failed to factor in Covenant. They assessed your humanity, but they fundamentally overlooked your inherent divinity. They miscalculated because they mistakenly assumed you were standing alone. They underestimated the profound depth of your unwavering connection to God, a connection that doesn't manifest on their meticulously crafted charts or elaborate strategies. They anticipated fragility in areas where Covenant had already constructed impenetrable fortresses. That's why the weapons formed against you, but they ultimately failed to vanquish you. That's why the meticulously crafted setups ultimately backfired. They presumed your breaking point was far closer than it actually was, because they could never accurately gauge the strength that emanates from being chosen. And this is precisely what renders your victory so extraordinary. You didn't merely survive their relentless attacks. You shattered their meticulous study. Every instance of your endurance invalidated their data. Every time you resolutely refused to yield, their entire research framework collapsed. You became unpredictable because you were no longer operating within the confines of mere human strength, but rather within the encompassing shelter of divine covenant. Triumphing in this trial signified not only withstanding the barrage of blows, but also demonstrating that the very aspects they intended to exploit for your destruction became the avenues through which your unyielding resilience was revealed. What was intended to expose your fragility ultimately illuminated their profound blindness. They meticulously studied you, yet they never truly comprehended you. They attempted to map your weaknesses, but they ultimately discovered that you are unbreakable within the bonds of covenant. Number 5, your breaking point became your birth point. Your breaking point became your point of genesis, and that is the truth that will remain largely incomprehensible to most. They perceived your collapse as an abject failure, as the definitive conclusion to your narrative, but in actuality, it represented the antithesis of that. That breaking was not the closure of a final chapter. It was the violent tearing open of something entirely new and transformative. You reached a point where human strength simply could not sustain you any further, where your willpower, your resilience, your meticulously crafted plans, and even your most cherished hopes reached an abrupt standstill. That is the precise juncture where divine power intervened. Successfully navigating this trial didn't imply that you circumvented the breakdown altogether. Rather, it signified that you permitted the breakdown to serve as the doorway to your spiritual rebirth. Everything you relinquished, every tear you shed, every moment you felt as though you were unraveling at the seams, all of it became the raw material from which God would meticulously reconstruct you. That's what those on the periphery fail to grasp. They assess survival based on outward displays of strength, but God assesses it based on the willingness to release control, to crumble if necessary, and to entrust Him with the task of rebuilding from the foundational level. In that breaking, you were emptied of the old self, the ingrained illusions, the insatiable need for control, and the burdensome weight of everything that no longer served your highest purpose. The collapse facilitated the creation of space for a version of you that had always been concealed beneath the surface, patiently awaiting its emergence. This elucidates why the very moment others presumed you were irrevocably finished, Heaven recognized it as your initiation. The moment you were stripped of what you erroneously believed constituted your power was the precise moment you became untouchable in ways they could never comprehend. They anticipated that you would be permanently crushed beyond repair, but instead the crushing became the pressing that ultimately yielded something of immeasurable value within you. The breaking point didn't signify weakness. It validated destiny. Not everyone survives that magnitude of collapse, and even fewer permit it to transform them rather than annihilate them. But you did. You allowed the ruins to become the foundation for something infinitely greater, and in doing so you were reborn not merely in a religious sense, but in the profound sense of authentic identity. You emerged with a strength that defies human explanation because it wasn't sustained by human means. That's why your breaking point will perpetually be remembered as the genesis of the real you. Number 6, God let them win battles to prove they couldn't win the war. God permitted them to achieve fleeting victories to demonstrate their ultimate inability to win the enduring war. That represents one of the most challenging truths to internalize when you are the one enduring the relentless blows. Superficially, it resembled utter defeat. You lost aspects you deeply cherished. Individuals walked away with what appeared to be triumphs over you. Your reputation tarnished your character, impugned opportunities, slipping irrevocably through your grasp. To the external world, it appeared as though you were perpetually on the losing side. However, heaven wasn't interpreting those moments as mere losses. They were deliberate exposures. They were meticulously crafted setups designed to reveal the inherently limited scope of your enemy's power. Understand that God doesn't need to shield you from every skirmish to validate His unwavering presence. Occasionally, He permits certain conflicts to manifest as though you have been overcome, not to humiliate you, but to unequivocally demonstrate to the world that even stripped bare, even wounded, even counted out, you resolutely maintain your stance. That type of testimony doesn't emanate from perpetual victory, but rather from undeniable resilience. What they erroneously perceived as a triumph was in actuality their ultimate limitation. They could seize possessions, commandeer positions, and even manipulate individuals, but they could never appropriate your inherent essence. They couldn't touch what defined you as chosen, and that constituted the crux of the entire war. This clarifies why those so-called losses were in fact necessary. Without them, both you and every observer might have erroneously attributed your strength to your material possessions, rather than recognizing the inherent strength of your soul. By permitting them to achieve superficial victories, God compelled the truth to surface. Nothing external can define a soul anchored securely within Him. Every hollow victory your adversaries celebrated merely underscored the indisputable reality that they possessed no enduring power. They may have stolen transient moments, but they could never rewrite your ultimate ending. The underlying lesson was deceptively simple yet profoundly brutal. You didn't need to emerge victorious in every single encounter to validate your status as chosen. Successfully navigating the trial entailed recognizing that survival itself constituted an ultimate victory. You traversed the inferno and emerged scorched but not consumed. You endured humiliation, betrayal, and profound loss, and yet resolutely refused to relinquish your core values. That doesn't represent defeat. It represents triumph on a scale that most individuals will never truly comprehend. God permitted them to win just enough to expose that their so-called victories were nothing more than fleeting illusions, while your continued survival served as eternal proof that the war was never theirs to win. Number 7, you carried scars, not stains. You carry scars, not stains, and that subtle distinction represents everything. Scars are tangible evidence of survival. They proclaim, "Indeed, I was wounded. Indeed, I was cut deeply, but I healed completely without succumbing to the insidious effects of poison." Stains, on the other hand, embody precisely what the enemy relentlessly sought to inflict upon you. They desired that the defilement of bitterness would permanently adhere to you, that the enveloping darkness of resentment would take root within your soul, and that the inherent ugliness of their actions would ultimately define your self-perception. That was their overriding objective from the outset. Not merely to inflict pain, but to indelibly mark you in such a way that you would forever be incapable of perceiving yourself as pure and unblemished. Yet here you stand scarred, yet fundamentally uncorrupted. Every scar adorning you serves as a tangible marker of truth, a potent reminder that you endured what should have irrevocably destroyed you. And rather than becoming twisted and embittered, you emerged even more authentically aligned with your true self. The scars you bear do not diminish your inherent value. They profoundly elevate it. They serve as irrefutable evidence that you traversed the harrowing battlefield and yet emerged whole and unbroken. The pain you endured did not extinguish your inner light. It illuminated it even more brilliantly. That encapsulates the fundamental difference between a chosen one and the masses. While others emerge stained, carrying the indelible filth of their experiences, you emerged with scars that eloquently testify that you were rigorously tested, yet you remained undefiled. And here's what renders this so extraordinary. Scars communicate a compelling narrative without uttering a single word. Individuals observe them whether they manifest physically, emotionally, or spiritually. And they immediately comprehend that you have lived through something exceptionally profound. But what they also perceive is that those transformative experiences did not extinguish your inherent gentleness, your inherent purity, or your fundamental capacity to love unconditionally. That confluence of qualities is extraordinarily rare. Most individuals either carry no scars because they have never confronted the inferno, or they carry stains because they permitted the inferno to contaminate their very essence. You are fundamentally different. You bear scars that shimmer as undeniable proof that your soul remains untouched. They attempted to render you unrecognizable, sought to distort your character until it mirrored their own pervasive damage, but all they ultimately accomplished was revealing the immeasurable depth of your unwavering authenticity. What you now embody cannot be fabricated. It doesn't represent superficial strength. It transcends mere performance. It embodies the unshakable truth of someone who has not only endured immense adversity, but has also healed completely and unequivocally. That unyielding authenticity is untouchable. It instills profound fear in those who sought to break you because your scars expose the magnitude of their utter failure. They intended to permanently stain you, but all they ultimately accomplished was highlighting that you are divinely chosen, and nothing can ever contaminate what God has irrevocably sealed. Number 8, they failed the test they set for you. They failed the very test they painstakingly designed for you. And that truth cuts far deeper than any assault they ever launched against you. They erroneously believed that they were the examiners wielding the authority to evaluate your worth, your inherent strength, and your ultimate destiny. They were convinced that the meticulously crafted traps, the calculated betrayals, and the relentless pressure they strategically implemented would expose your inherent flaws, but the undeniable reality is that the very moment they elected to test you, they inadvertently subjected themselves to their own examination. Every move they meticulously executed became evidence not of your inherent weakness, but of their own internal corruption. What they confidently believed would discredit you ultimately disqualified them from any semblance of moral authority. This represents the divine reversal that remains imperceptible to most. Initially, while you were enduring profound hardship, all eyes were fixated on you. Would you succumb to the pressure? Would you ultimately concede defeat? Would you fail to meet their predetermined standards? However, behind the scenes, heaven meticulously documented their actions, scrutinized their underlying motives, and recorded their unyielding cruelty. Your unwavering endurance became your ultimate vindication, while their reprehensible behavior became their inescapable judgment. By attempting to crush you, they inadvertently revealed the totality of their inherent selves. They exposed their all-consuming envy, their carefully constructed lies, their pervasive deceit, and their willingness to obliterate another soul merely to satiate their insatiable desire for power. They revealed to the world the true contents of their depraved hearts, and in doing so they irrevocably failed the very test they had created. And the inherent irony lies in this. Your enemies naively believed that the trial was centered around your potential collapse, but the profound lesson to be gleaned was centered around their ultimate exposure. You persevered with unwavering resolve, and that endurance served as a testament far more potent than any defense you could have constructed. Meanwhile, their Machiavellian schemes transformed into a mirror relentlessly reflecting their own inherent ugliness. What they maliciously intended as irrefutable proof of your inherent unworthiness became undeniable evidence of their own pervasive corruption. The meticulously crafted trap they set became the very place where they inadvertently tripped and fell. This is precisely why chosen ones possess the profound ability to walk away with unparalleled peace. The victory transcends mere survival. It resides in the fact that their malicious intentions are now indelibly written in plain sight for all to scrutinize. God completely flipped the script. Your profound suffering transformed into a grand stage upon which their depravity was publicly broadcast, and their reprehensible actions became a permanent record that even they cannot erase. They mistakenly believed that they were in complete control of the narrative, but in reality the trial was never solely about testing you. It was about revealing the inherent nature of their being. And in that transformative revelation, their inescapable judgment was unequivocally sealed. They failed the test they meticulously designed for you, and that failure will pursue them far longer than any wound they maliciously attempted to inflict upon you. Number 9. You were refined for leadership, not comfort. You were meticulously refined for profound leadership, not transient comfort, and that intrinsic truth elucidates why your path has been so relentlessly brutal. The trial you endured was never intended to ease your passage through life. It was designed to mold you into someone whose voice commands undeniable authority. Influence devoid of substantive depth is inherently dangerous, and God would never bestow power upon you without first ensuring that you could wield it with integrity. Every trial methodically stripped away arrogance. Every setback systematically burned away illusions. And every profound loss meticulously carved out a space for humility. What you endured was not a form of punishment. It was rigorous preparation. Leadership within the divine kingdom transcends mere titles, follower counts, or expansive platforms. It is inextricably linked to unassailable credibility, and that is forged within the crucible of fire. You cannot fabricate it, you cannot feign it, and you certainly cannot purchase it. It emanates from traversing valleys that most individuals actively avoid, and emerging with your inherent integrity wholly intact. That's precisely why you were pressed so vehemently. God needed to ensure that when the opportune moment arose, you wouldn't exploit the influence He intended to grant you. You wouldn't utilize it to dominate, manipulate, or oppress others because you intimately understand the profound sensation of being powerless, overlooked, and silenced. Successfully navigating this arduous trial wasn't about attaining an untouchable status. It was about solidifying your reputation as someone inherently trustworthy. The scars you bear serve as your irrefutable credentials. They authorize you to speak with authority in areas where others can only theorize. They bestow upon you a compassion that cannot be manufactured because you profoundly understand the immense cost of enduring suffering. and the invaluable worth of extending grace. Individuals will heed your counsel not because you demand respect, but because your authentic narrative commands it. That brand of authenticity cannot be fabricated. It is the inherent fruit of being refined, not superficially indulged. And here's the profound irony. While others ardently pursued fleeting comfort, you were being meticulously forged for enduring leadership. While some actively sought fleeting applause, you were being stripped down to your fundamental essence, so that when influence ultimately arrived, it wouldn't corrupt you from within. You were emptied of self-importance, so that when God filled you, what overflowed would be authentic truth, not mere ego. That's why your voice now carries such substantial weight. It doesn't resonate loudly because it strives to do so. It resonates deeply because it has survived what should have silenced it permanently. In the end, the rigorous refinement was never about rendering your life easier. It was about rendering your presence undeniably transformative. When you articulate your thoughts, chains shatter not through mere charisma, but because your inherent authority has been rigorously tested, unequivocally proven, and meticulously refined within the crucible of fire. That credibility is unshakable, and it is the primary reason God can now confidently entrust you with enduring leadership. Number 10. And there's so much more we could delve into, isn't there? But for now, let's just let all of that sink in. The bottom line is this: you, the anointed one, the chosen one, you've been through the fire. You've faced trials that would break most people, and you emerged not unscathed perhaps, but certainly unbowed, stronger, and carrying a light that shines brighter than ever before. You were refined, you were studied, you were even allowed to lose some battles. But through it all, you remained true to yourself, and that's the victory that truly matters. So what resonated with you the most? What questions are bubbling up? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and share our experiences, support each other, and celebrate this incredible journey. And if you found this message helpful, inspiring, or just plain thought-provoking, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future insights and encouragement. There's always more to learn and more to share. Take care, and remember, you are chosen, you are powerful, and you are loved. Are loved. Are loved. Are loved. Are loved.